Hi, Assassins.
I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms.
We're just two girls who can't stop talking about fantasy books.
After deep diving into Heir of Fire with you all, we're diving into the broader world of SJM's universe, the Maasverse. If you're like us and you can't help but notice the little hints, parallels, and Easter eggs that connect this story to ACOTAR and to Crescent City. Today we'll be looking at these connections just for Heir of Fire, the fourth book in the series. Because let's be honest, we'd be here for 10 hours if we covered the entire series at once. So we'll be releasing one of these episodes after each book deep dive.
We'll be talking about what's obviously connected, what's subtly hinted at, and where we think all these threads might lead next. Get ready for some wild theories and, of course, a little speculation because you just never know with SJM. Now that we're halfway through the series, you'll also notice that we'll move some connections and concepts around when it comes to these Maasverse episodes. Something might have been in the parallel section in a previous Maasverse episode, but if it plays a larger role in the Maasverse in the book we're covering, it'll get moved up and vice versa. Also, go listen to our What is the Maasverse episode, which gives you a quick overview of what the Maasverse even is.
Let's kick things off by diving into the biggest links that connect Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City. These are the major hints and plot points that pretty much scream Maasverse. Hello! In this section, we'll only cover things that are confirmed and build on what those confirmations could mean in the terms of the Maasverse. Obviously, this is a Maasverse episode, so if you have not read all of A Court of Thorns and Roses, Throne of Glass, and Crescent City, you should come back to us when you have. Because, spoiler, that's our spoiler warning, so turn back now. Now that we have 3 Maasverse connection episodes, we can build on some links that we have already established.
Let's start with the concept of the word, which exists in all 3 series in one way or another. Let's recap what we know about the word. From the beginning of Throne of Glass, we're introduced to the idea of other realms and worlds, which are accessed through word keys and word gates. In Crescent City, a similar concept appears with Luna's horn, which is tattooed on Bryce's back. The horn allows her to open the rifts between realms. When Bryce travels to Prythian, Luna's horn is revealed to be the 4th item in the Dread Trove, along with the mask, the crown, and the harp. All 4 items, including the horn, were created by the Asteri/Daglin using the cauldron, which they'd corrupted. In House of Flame and Shadow, the word is mentioned again in connection to Urd. The Underking says Urd, spelled U-R-D, quote, was not a goddess, but a force that governed worlds, a cauldron of life. And in the Old World, she was called Wyrd, spelled W-Y-R-D. This confirms that Urd from Crescent City and the word from Throne of Glass are the same cosmic force. The Underking also says shifters in Crescent City originated from that old world where Urd/Wyrd existed, meaning the shifters in Crescent City come from Aurelia. While not confirmed, Urd/Wyrd's description, aka a life-giving force tied to creation, is basically exactly how the mother in ACOTAR is described. The mother spilled the cauldron to create Prythian. And that's just like the Maasverse, like building blocks.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. In this book, we've learned more about word keys and what happens when you bring them all together. Maeve tells Aelin that the word keys, quote, can be used to create, to destroy, and to open portals. This is almost verbatim to what the Dread Trove can do. The harp can open portals to different locations and realities. By the end of A Court of Silver Flames, we learn that the harp can also alter time. The mask is able to raise the dead and control them. The horn can open the rift between realms. The crown can control minds of others. When we look at the Dread Trove, we can almost exactly match it up to what the word keys do, because they open portals and they create by calling upon the dead. The only real outlier is the crown, because word keys do not allow people to control the minds of others. However, Maeve, who is a Valk queen, does have that power.
It's almost like the Dread Trove is a more powerful, refined version of the word keys. Maeve tells Aelin that if the king got a hold of all 3 word keys, he could, quote, have an army of the dead inhabited by the Valg, an army that does not need to eat or sleep or breathe, an army that will sleep like a plague across your continent and others, maybe other worlds too. This is exactly what Nesta does in the Bog of Urid using the mask. Again, that is just one of the Dread Trove items. Maeve says you need all 3 word keys to do that, so it does seem like the Dread Trove items have more power than the word keys. This is about all we can confirm about the role of the word in the Maasverse. I have a huge theory that I'm cooking up, but I need to reread House of Flame and Shadow to refine it, because if the trove was made from the cauldron and the cauldron holds fate and fate is the word and the trove items are word keys, but better versions of them. But I'm going to stop because I sound a little unhinged, but I am cooking.
Love that. We love that. Next up, our next major link is Black Blood. Again, this isn't a new connection for us, but we like to compile all the evidence for these episodes because, again, we're a little crazy. In this book, Aelin faces off against a Valg prince. When she scrapes his cheek, he bleeds black blood. Aelin also scrapes underneath the fingernails of one of the Valg victims, and what does she find? Oh, black blood. Why does this matter, you ask? Because it is established in Throne of Glass that the Valg bleed black blood. And this is the clearest shared trait between the Asteri, the Daglin, and the Valg, and that is that their blood is black. In House of Flame and Shadow, Bryce kills Vesperus, who claims to be an Asteri/Daglin, whose blood is described as dark blood, matching the Valg blood. Okay, I hope you're following. And ACOTAR, the Weaver, and Lanthus also bleed black blood. While we don't see the Bone Carver's blood, he is the Weaver's brother. So we can assume that the Bone Carver and Koschei also bleed black blood, because the Weaver, the Bone Carver, and Koschei are all siblings. They're siblings, okay? Again, we know that there are a lot of thoughts and theories about whether the Valg are actually the same as the Asteri Daglin, and it hasn't been confirmed that they are, but the fact that they all bleed black blood is pretty hard to fucking ignore. And you can't tell me that they're not the same thing, but we'll get to that at a later point in time.
Yeah, we are in the camp that they are the same thing, but we do understand that there's people who are like, well, and I respect that, but yeah. Our last major link is Brandon Galathinius, the first king of Terrasen. In this book, Maeve reveals that Brandon was born with the Bastard's Mark, aka the Nameless Mark. Each of Brandon's heirs has the Nameless Mark. Why are we calling this a major connection? Because Brandon is directly linked to Lydia from Crescent City. In House of Flame and Shadow, we learn that the shifters, who have both an animal form and a fae form, come from Aurelia. And Lydia thinks, quote, it confirmed what Lydia had long guessed, why she had named Brandon after the oldest legends from her family's bloodline, of a fae king from another world with fire in his veins who had created stags with the power of flame to be his sacred guards. So Lydia comes from Brandon's bloodline. Her son is named Brandon, after Brandon Galathinius. But do you know what we would pay good money to know? One, I'd pay good money to know if once Aelin paid the price by forging the lock, her nameless mark disappeared. I quickly searched through the end of Kingdom of Ash to see if it was mentioned, but I did not see anything, so can't confirm if it's still there. If it's not there, no idea. Two, if the mark did disappear, I'd love to know if Lydia and her sons have the mark, because it would help answer some questions that we have about time in the Maasverse. In House of Flame and Shadow, we learned that the Asteri, ACOTAR Fae, and Tog Fae are said to have come to Midgard 15,000 years ago. But in Throne of Glass, Brandon helped fight the Valg around 1,000 years before Aelin's time. If we choose to believe that Aelin only fell through worlds in Kingdom of Ash, then Aelin, Bryce, and Farah are alive at the same time in the multiverse, because Bryce meets Farah and Rhys in House of Flame and Shadow, and Aelin sees Rhys and a pregnant Farah when falling through worlds. But the math is not mathing, because if Lydia's bloodline arrived in Midgard 15,000 years ago, how would she know who Brandon is? Someone give me an answer. Especially since we're meant to think that Brandon rose to power 14,000 years after her bloodline traveled to Midgard. The math is not mathing. This confirmed connection between Lydia and Brandon creates a timeline/continuity gap, unless there's more to Brandon's origin or some sort of lineage record system we just don't know about yet, like a Maasverse 23andMe, which is the only way that Lydia could know that she's related to Brandon.
All right, now that we have covered the big elements that connect Heir of Fire to the Maasverse, now let's talk about some of the smaller connections. We don't have a particular order for these minor links, but we are considering finding a new way to release our graphic organizers for this Maasverse episodes, so you can reference specific books, chapters, pages, etc.
Let's kick it off with minor links that we're building on from previous Maasverse Connections episodes. Our first minor link builds on something we've already seen Aelin do, imbue an object with her power. She does this with Damaris in Crown of Midnight when she fights off the demon creature after opening the portal. In this book, she uses this technique again when facing off against the Valak princes. She imbues Goldrin. Quote, it was second nature, somehow, that flames leapt down her blade as she struck back, willing fire into the sword itself. Again, we've touched on this before, so it's just going to be some quick bullet points. But in A Court of Silver Flames, Nesta accidentally imbues weapons with her magic, and the blacksmith believes that they're cursed. In A Court of Silver Flames, we also learn that the High Fae had raw elemental magic and could infuse objects like art, jewelry, and weapons with their power. This is, again, exactly what Aelin is doing in Throne of Glass with Goldrin. She imbues it with her power and almost uses Goldrin as a way to store her magic, which we see her do in Kingdom of Ash.
And to piggyback off that, let's talk about powers in the Maasverse in general. While Aelin is in Mistward, Luca gives us more information about the kind of magic powers that exist in this world. Quote, no one here has any exciting or rare abilities, like shapeshifting into whatever form they want, or controlling fire or oracular sight. We did have a female wander in with raw magic 2 years ago. She could do anything she wanted, summon any element, and she was here for a week before Maeve called her to Dornell. We never heard from her again. A shame. She was so pretty, too. But it's the same here as it is anywhere else. A few people with a pathetic trace of elemental powers that are really only fun for farmers. What a fucking lore drop, baby. So let's break down the powers Luca lists off, starting with shapeshifting into whatever form they want. I feel like if Luca meant a shapeshifter, like Lysandra for example, he would have specified shapeshifter. Remember, Lysandra is human, not a fae. She is a shapeshifter. So we can assume that Luca met a fae who can shapeshift into any form they want. Just like our little Tam Tam in ACOTAR. When Feyre gets a drop of power, she inherits those abilities too. Later, when Dorian masters his raw magic, he is also able to shapeshift into various forms as well. But it's not like his main power is shapeshifting. The second power Luca lists off is controlling fire, which we know comes from Brandon's line in the Throne of Glass world. In ACOTAR, Fae from the Autumn Court have fire manipulation powers. We've seen Eris use his fire manipulation. In Crescent City, Bryce's dad, who is the Autumn King, aka Inardanin, I don't know if I said that correct, and I really don't give a fuck, also has fire magic. Inar was abusive to Rune when he was a child and used his fire magic to burn him. So, fuck him. We also see Lydia use fire in Crescent City. Lydia is able to extinguish the flames from the Autumn King in the Cave of Princes, though we know that Lydia's firepower also comes from Brandon Galathinius' line. Interessante. Yeah.
The third power that Luca lists off is oracular sight, aka being an oracle and being able to see or predict the future. While we're still learning exactly just how Elaine's powers work in ACOTAR, she is a seer, which seems to be very similar, if not the same thing as being an oracle. The oracle plays a huge role in Crescent City, where she is one of the 7 heads of Lunathian and controls the Old Square. The Fae will visit the oracle as part of the Great Rite to enter adulthood. During that visit, the oracle is supposed to be able to get a feel for that Fae's career and general success in the future. And finally, Luca lists off raw magic when he tells Aelin about the female who wandered into Mistward and was scooped up by Maeve shortly after. Because he uses the term female and this happened in Mistward, we can assume that this raw magic wielder was a Fae female, or at least partly Fae. In Throne of Glass, the only character we meet with raw magic is Dorian, who is human. Raw magic, as it's described in Throne of Glass, does not appear anywhere else in the Maasverse. In ACOTAR, most of the magic described is elemental or tied to a court. In Crescent City, there's a few different kinds of magic since Midgard mixed all of the Fae together, basically. Dorian and this female are the only characters we found with confirmed raw magic. We saw just how powerful Dorian became by training his magic for just a few short months. And again, it brings up the questions we asked when we covered this exact moment in our Heir of Fire deep dives. Who is this Fae female? Where is she now? And what can she do? What does this mean for the Maasverse? We see that certain powers are common across the worlds, but so far, raw magic seems to remain unique to the Throne of Glass world and kind of like exclusive.
Our next minor link is kind of hard to describe. It's the general concept that there are other realms, but they're different from places like Prythian or Midgard. We're talking about realms like the Otherworld and Hell. This comes up a few times in this book. When Aelin is burning out, she compares the feeling of being in Hell, spelled H-E-L-L. In Crescent City, we have the Prince of Hell, spelled H-E-L. Hell is their planet. It is not hell like the bad place, like you're going to hell, kind of thing. In ACOTAR, Feyre keeps a dying fairy company and says this prayer, quote, Mother hold you, pass through the gates, and smell the immortal land of milk and honey. Fear no evil, feel no pain. This prayer implies that in the ACOTAR series, the Fae who die pass through, quote, gates to a land of milk and honey, which is where they spend their afterlife. Based on the description, we can assume this is quote unquote a good realm. When hell is mentioned in the ACOTAR series, it is sometimes capitalized, but sometimes it isn't. In the first book, Feyre uses the expression, quote, go to hell, with hell capitalized, so we know that at least the humans are familiar with the concept. In A Court of Mist and Fury, when Feyre visits the bone carver, he is very, very curious about where she went when she died. Feyre tells him that in that place she had no body. There was only darkness and the thread that connected her to Rhys. There was no light, no afterlife. The bone carver presses further, but Feyre tells him that there is no other world, no portal, just darkness. This entire conversation between them reveals that the bone carver believes or wants to believe that there is some sort of afterworld and seems concerned when there isn't one. The bone carver also has no interest in returning to his homeworld, mainly because he thinks that it's gone. There are 3 other mentions of different realms in Heir of Fire. The first one is, quote, Otherworld, which Adian mentions he'll go to when he dies. That is really all we get about that one. The second one is the, quote, Afterworld, which Rowan mentions when he accuses Aelin of preferring to go to hell, so she doesn't have to face the people she feels that she has failed. Again, that is really all that we got there from that one. And the third realm is where the Valg are from, which is described as, quote, a realm of eternal darkness and ice and wind. Again, that's really all we get about that.
When those realms, like hell or the other world, are brought up in this book, we often see them paired with information about immortality and reincarnation. During a conversation with Rowan, Aelin says that she feels pretty lucky that she's mortal because she only has to endure this life once. Remember, at this point, Aelin doesn't know that she has an immortal lifespan, but the wording of that has always stuck out to us. It could just mean that Aelin only expects to live one human lifespan rather than the Fae who live hundreds of years, which again would span several human lifespans. But the way that it's phrased makes it seem like there's a possibility of reincarnation or living life more than once, especially for the Fae. This is, again, like we mentioned in our deep dives, one of the only times that we see the concept of reincarnation being brought up. And again, we are not saying that this is fully confirmed a link or a thing, but the wording is very specific, so.
Later on, Rowan and Aelin are talking about the Karanam bond and how some Fae abuse it. Rowan brings up that immortality can create monsters because it gives people millennia to hone their craft. In both ACOTAR and Crescent City, we meet Fae who have lived for hundreds of years. In those books, immortality is always a Fae trait, though some gods and goddesses and other creatures are immortal as well. For example, Amryn isn't Fae until after the events of A Court of Wings and Ruin, but she's lived literally thousands of years, existing in different forms. Amryn is one of the oldest immortal beings we meet in the Maasverse, and we wouldn't call her a monster, but she definitely operates on a different level of ethics/morality, which aligns to what Rowan points out to Selena. We also know that in the Throne of Glass world, your immortality can be yielded. In Heir of Fire, we learned that both Mab and Mala gave up their immortality because they fell in love with human men, which, I'm sorry, no man is worth that, sister. No man is worth that.
Hard agree. I would never give up my immortality for some dude. And now let's introduce some new minor links. The first one is the existence of Barrow Wights. In Heir of Fire, Rowan brings Selena to what is essentially a cemetery and tells her that if she can face the Barrow Wights, he'll take her to Doranel right then and there. This challenge is interrupted because instead of facing off against a Barrow Wight, Selena ends up encountering a Valg prince instead, which is a terrible fucking trade-off. But let's talk about wights. Wights are undead creatures. They're almost like zombies. A barrow is an ancient burial mound. You guys know what I mean. So barrow wights are undead creatures that basically haunt burial grounds. Why is this a minor link? Because the Underking in Crescent City seems to be a barrow wight who also comes from the Throne of Glass world. In House of Flame and Shadow, we learn that the Underking is not from Hell, spelled Hel. The Underking was birthed by the Void, so many thoughts on that, and came from the Shifter's world, aka Aurelia. More than that, though, the Underking says that he prefers Midgard because in Aurelia, he was confined to, quote, caves and barrows, just like a barrow wight. We mentioned this earlier, but the Underking is also the one who tells us that Erd and Wyrd are the same force which governs worlds. He's the one who tells us that Wyrd is Erd's true name, which is what they call her in Aurelia. The Underking is also the one who describes Wyrd as a cauldron of life, brimming with the language of creation, which we talked about again in our major links section. Again, Aelin does not get to encounter a true Barrow Wight in Heir of Fire, so we cannot call this a major connection, but there definitely seems to be a link there.
I'm sorry for all my Game of Thrones girlies. Every time I hear the word white, it just gives me PTSD. Yeah, if you know, you know. But Anyways, our next minor link is the concept of half-breeds, or let's say maybe demi-fae. That sounds a little better, as they're called in Heir of Fire. Maeve keeps all the demi-fae confined, or half-breeds, whatever, to Mistward, and they are generally treated as less than. Maeve does not allow half-breeds in Dornell unless they prove themselves. Aedion and Aelin are both demi-fae, just different kinds. Demi-fae doesn't mean exactly half and half. The label is used a little loosely. It can mean someone born of one human parent and one fae parent, or anyone with a hint of fae blood in their veins. In Crescent City, we see the same concept. Bryce is a half-breed, and that term is used in a derogatory way, the same way it is seen by Maeve and Heir of Fire. Sabine and the Autumn King both use the term, quote, half-breed to insult Bryce, and it seems like a general population of full-blooded fae in Midgard agree with that sentiment. In the ACOTAR world, we have one confirmed half-breed, Miriam. She had a human mother and a high fae father, Kratea. The island that Miriam and Draken? Is that his name?
It's been so long since I'd listened to the ACOTAR audiobook. I think it's Draken. It might be No, it's Draken. It's Draken.
The island that Miriam and Draken rule is the only known place where humans and fairies live together in peace. However, we also know that Rhysand is half high fae, half Illyrian, making him technically also a half-breed as well, just a different kind.
Our next minor link is the concept of something being made with a capital M. We will eventually move this into major links later in the series, but we try to stay focused on what we learn in each book, so let's stick with what we learn in Heir of Fire. When Murtaugh tells the others about how Rolf described the Valg, he says that Rolf and his men described it as being made because it wore a black wordstone collar and it was obviously being controlled by some sort of unseen force. The wordstone collar is what allows the Valg prince to possess its human host. Then Manon faces off against the Kraken witch, who ends up being her half-sister, Rhiannon Kraken II. The Kraken tells Manon that she was made into a monster. She emphasizes it too by repeating made Manon. There are two different kinds of made. The Valg are made through the act of possession, while witches are made into monsters through what they are taught. But this concept of being made pops up in ACOTAR and Crescent City. When Nesta and Elaine enter the cauldron, they are both considered to be made by it, which allows them to use made items like the Dread Trope. We also learn that the Star Sword, aka Gwydion, was made when King Fion dipped it into the cauldron. Gwydion is what they call it in Prythian, the Star Sword is what they call it in Midgard. Truth Teller is Gwydion's, partner knife, and that is Azrael's little knife. I don't know if it's little, actually. Oops. Nesta, Elaine, and these items are considered cauldron made. Made beings and things can basically sense and track each other. Bryce is also considered somewhat made, with a capital N, since she has the essence of Luna's horn infused into the tattoo on her back. In Hofas, we also learn that things can be unmade, which is what Truth Teller is for. It's the balance, basically. Again, the maid in ACOTAR and Crescent City is different from the maid in Throne of Glass, but they are all linked by one force, the word. And that's all we can say for now because, like we said, this will pop up again, but we try not to get ahead of ourselves, even though that's what we would desperately like to do.
Yes, but we would literally be here for the rest of the day. Our episode would be 24 hours long. Deadass. Now, let's talk about some parallels in the Maasverse. This section is where we discuss phrases, descriptions, and connections that we can't 100% connect yet, but let's just say that we're pretty sure that they exist for a reason. For the parallel section, we'll break it down into 3 different sections: lore, descriptions, and language. Let's start with lore. For us, lore is the shared knowledge and stories that are common in the Maasverse. It includes things like traditions and beliefs. Basically, it's like world building in a sense. Our first lore parallel is iron. We'll make this quick because we've touched on it in our Crown of Midnight and Assassin's Blade Maasverse episodes, and we don't really learn anything new in Heir of Fire. Rowan tells Aelin that iron in the blood pushes against their magic and that iron is used against magic wielders in an attempt to stifle their magic. Sorcerer's potions help Dorian control his magic because they're infused with iron, which stifles magic, and stifles his magic in specific. In ACOTAR, iron is harmless to Fae, despite humans thinking it can be used against the Fae. But like we've said before, maybe that belief comes from another world, like Aurelia, where iron can and is used against the Fae. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in when we get to our theory section, because I have a theory that I have with this, but yeah.
Fun. I love that. Our second lore parallel is the concept of bargains. Again, we've touched on this one before when we learned about how Rolf bargained his soul for the map, and Falcon NR, aka Lyssandra's uncle, bargained 20 years of his life for the spider silk. In this book, Manon heads off to find the Stygian spiders because she needs spider silk to reinforce Abraxas's wings. As she heads off, the overseer, who, by the way, is human, tells her, quote, "Be careful and think through any bargain they offer you." At this point in the series, we are not aware that the Stygian spiders are vile creatures who answer to Maeve, but they are seen as scary, otherworldly, and ruthless, which is why the overseer warns Manon to think through any bargains that's offered to her from them. Also, they're horse-sized, in case you guys forgot. These are horse-sized spiders. So, yeah. In ACOTAR, bargains also exist. Alice, I think that's how you say her name, warns Farah about bargains by telling her, quote, "Don't make deals with anyone unless your life depends on it." In ACOTAR, the Night Court bargains are sealed with magical tattoos. These tattoos are permanent and stay until the bargain is fulfilled. Just like in Throne of Glass with the Stygian spiders, bargains in ACOTAR are magically binding and they require some form of payment. Manon ends up tricking the Stygian spiders and thankfully avoids having to make a deal with them altogether, but it's interesting that the lore seems to be the same. Bargains and deals are something to be careful about and they require specific wording. We see that in Heir of Fire when Aelin and Maeve are making their agreement. Aelin will train her magic with Rowan, and once he thinks that she's ready, Maeve will tell her about the word keys. During this exchange, though, Celaena insists that Maeve add truthfully to their deal, as in Maeve will truthfully answer her questions about the keys. This seems to, amuse Maeve, which, fuck off, insinuating that in the Throne of Glass world, bargains and deals also have to be carefully crafted. Interesting.
Very, very much so. Our next lore, also, I don't know who I think I am, but I just love a good accent sometimes. It just makes it a little fun. So please don't mind me. Our next lore parallel is a classification of fae and fairies. In Heir of Fire, we meet the little folk who are fairies. She was a fairy. Okay. And I'm Maddie. Okay, let me stop. I am an avid TikTok user, unfortunately. But Emrys, who is a storyteller, also tells us about fairies of the past. Quote, "When there was no mortal king on Wendellin's throne, the fairies still walked among us. Some were good and fair, some were prone to little mischiefs, and some were fouler and darker than the blackest night." Celaena swallowed. These were words that had been spoken in front of hearths for thousands of years, spoken in kitchens like this one. Tradition. It was those wicked fairies, Emrys went on, the words resonating in every crack and crevice, that you always had to watch for on the ancient roads or in the woods or on nights like this, when you can hear the wind moaning your name. There are many kinds of fairies: the little folk, good fairies, mischievous fairies, and foul fairies. The fairies are separate from the fae/demi-fae, though it seems like they share some sort of lineage or connection, though it's never really explained. In ACOTAR, we have classifications as well. We have the high fae, then the lesser fairies. The main difference between the high fae and the lesser fairies is that the high fae physically look more human. In ACOTAR, many of the lesser fairy species have names. The Bogi, the Naga, how the fuck did I say that? Picts? Okay, we're just gonna go with Picts. It's spelled Picts. The river nymphs and the water wraiths are all lesser fairies. In Akamath, we get a physical description of the lesser fairies, but not too many descriptions about what they're like. Feyre describes the lesser fairies as, quote, "some long-limbed, hairless, and glowing as if an inner moon dwelled beneath their night dark skin. Some are covered in opalescent scales that shifted color with each graceful step of their clawed, webbed feet. Some elegant, wild puzzles of horns and hooves and striped fur. In Crescent City, the Fae are considered a species of veneer. Just like in Throne of Glass and ACOTAR, classifications also exist in Crescent City. The veneer are divided into different houses, depending on their species. And like we mentioned in our minor link section, the half-breed classification also exists in Crescent City.
Our last lore parallel is the use of crystals to enhance magic. In Heir of Fire, Kale sets up a little magic experiment for Dorian so they can figure out how the Redstone Towers work. He mentions that in Celaena's magic books, crystals were said to be good conduits for magic. He buys 3 white crystals, each about as long as his finger. When they start the ritual, the crystals are arranged in a triangle. Kale pours a line of red sand between the crystals and places a bowl of water in the center of the triangle. It's giving middle school seance, but, that's good. It's giving playing the Ouija board. However, we see similar rituals in Crescent City where different salts can be used to access demons from hell. The different salts are white salt, black salt, blood/red salt, and gray salts. The salts are said to contain grains of every size from flakes to hunks of salt. Using salts is helpful because it allows the summoner to only summon one demon at a time. Or so they think. In Crescent City, salts were also seen as protection against darker powers. There were rumors that the Asteres Crystal Palace was built on a slab of salt. This is a parallel because if you've ever gotten one of those crystal experiment kits, you know that you can grow crystals from sodium chloride, aka salt. So, in both of these worlds, crystals and salts are used to focus or control magic.
Okay, baby. Now let's get into the description of parallels. These are descriptions of characters, places, objects, etc. that are similar or the same throughout the Maasverse. Some of these we have touched on before, but let's revisit them and add up to what we learned in this book. Let's start with Wendelin and the description of the parallel to Valaris and the Night Court, because it's a little freaky, if you ask me. In our Crown of Midnight Maasverse episode, we pointed out that Selena says as she's off to Wendelin, she calls it a land of myths and monsters, a kingdom of dreams and nightmares made flesh, which is eerily similar to the description of the Court of Dreams and the Court of Nightmares. We spend this entire book seeing Wendelin, Doranel, and Mistward through Aylin's eyes, and the description parallels just continue to stack up. When Aylin is in Varese at the beginning of this book, we learn that the castle is made of limestone, which is a white stone. In Valaris, many of the buildings are made out of white marble and sandstone, which are both white and are visually very similar to limestone. Maeve's castle is also built of, quote, pale stone. At the end of Heir of Fire, Aylin and Rowan visit Maeve's castle in Doranel. We're told that jasmine wraps around the castle columns, and jasmine is a very fragrant flower. When Feyre first visits the Night Court, the first thing that she smells, you want to know, is jasmine. So the Night Court and Maeve's castle both smell like jasmine. Doranel is nicknamed the City of Rivers because it is located on a massive island in the center of a bunch of rivers. And ACOTAR, the Sidra River, flows through Valaris.
The jasmine one really, it's not a good one. It's really scary. But lastly in this section, let's talk about Mistward. Like its name suggests, it's covered in mist and surrounded by wards, which are created through these large stones. In House of Flame and Shadow, Maasverse explains that mist often mark a thin place where the barrier between worlds is weaker. We have obsessed about thin places, but we're going to try not to spiral. These thin places exist in every world and make it easier to travel between the realms. In Prythian, we know that the thin places are the Dust Court and the prison, which are both surrounded by mist. In Crescent City, Bryce tells us that the different mist-covered thin places are the Bone Quarter, the Northern Rift, and Avalon. So, is Mistward one of these thin places? It is literally, it's not just like a name. It is actually covered in mist. So, it could be. And is that why Maeve has it so heavily guarded with these ward stones? Just a reminder, these ward stones make it so magic does not work within Mistward. Okay? Again, we are not saying that Doranel or Wendelin or even Mistward are the same places as the Night Court or Valaris. We might get there one day. But there are a lot of description parallels.
And now, let's talk about some of the descriptions of Maeve and how they parallel the descriptions of Rhysand and Vesperus. I'm going to get way more into this in our theories and speculation section because if you've been here with us from the beginning, just know I have some things to say. But we will rapid fire through some of the more prominent ones. Aelin encounters Maeve 2 times in this book. Once at the beginning and then again at the end. Maeve is described as having dark black hair, pale white skin. When we meet her in Heir of Fire, she has black eyes. Though at the end of this book, Aelin describes them as violet, starry eyes. So, who knows? She is freakishly perfect and beautiful. Rhysand also has black hair. His eye color is up for debate. Sometimes it is described as a deep blue. Sometimes it's a deep blue violet. When Bryce meets him, she is taken aback by how much he looks like Rune, whose eyes are violet blue. Maeve does not have a fey animal form, but there are rumors of her, quote, other skin. Quote, there were legends whispered over fires about the other skin Maeve wore. No one had lived to tell anything beyond shadows and claws and darkness to devour your soul. Okay, Rhysand's beast form is described for the first time by Feyre in Akomath. She says, quote, a mighty darkness devoured the world, Soldiers in its path did not emerge again. My mate, death incarnate, night triumphant. Sorry, spiraling. Next, at the end of ACOTAR, we get a full description of his beast form. Quote, the talons came first, replacing fingers and feet. The dark scales, or perhaps feathers, I couldn't get a good look at them, covered his legs, his arms, his chest. His body contorted, bones and muscles growing and shifting. The beast form Reese had kept hidden, never liked to unleash, unless it was dire to do so. Before the cauldron swept me away, I beheld what happened to his head, his face. It was a thing of nightmares, nothing human or fey in it. It was a creature that lived in black pits and only emerged at night to hunt and feast. The face. It was those creatures that had been carved into the rock of a court of nightmares. That made up his throne. The throne not only a representation of his power, but of what lurked within. And with the wings... I'm sorry. Let's pause for a second. Maeve's, quote, other skin and Rhysand's beast form are basically described as both being monstrous, shadowy, and soul-devouring. Okay, both forms are rarely seen, deeply feared, and tied to darkness and destruction. Again, I'm going to get more into this in the theories and speculations, but Maeve and Rhysand's powers are so similar. In Heir of Fire, we see when Maeve tries to infiltrate Aelin's mind because one of her powers is mind manipulation. Rhysand is a Demadi, which is essentially the same thing. We know they have other powers in common, but again, we're going to try to stick to what we learned in Heir of Fire, but we will revisit these similarities as we move throughout the series. I'm sorry, I'm going to spiral about this so soon.
It is unfortunately a lot. There's a lot there. Our next description parallel is my favorite, swirls and patterns, aka how a lot of the language is described in the Maasverse. As Selene and Rowan approach Mistward, Selena notices some granite boulders which are carved with swirls and patterns. She believes them to be markers which are meant to warn humans to stay away. And if you listen to this episode, we did spiral about this back then. But let's remember that Selena knows what word marks look like. If these were word marks, she would have said that, but she does not say that. They're also not in the Fae language because she recognizes that language in Rowan's tattoos. So, for this section, we're going to assume that these whorls or patterns are not word marks or the Fae language. So, are the markings on these boulders a different language that she does not recognize? Whorls, patterns, and swirls are used all over the Maasverse to describe language, but the question that we can't stop asking is, what language is that? Because in ACOTAR, Amren uses magic that's described as swirls and whirls when her and Farah are drowning after trying to get the Book of Breathings. Farah says that they radiate out of her as if they were a language all her own. Many of the Night Court bargain tattoos are also described as having whirls like the one on Farah's hands. We know that the protection runes above the Archon's door are also described as whirls, swirls, and runes. In A Court of Silver Flames, the mask is embossed with, quote, whirls and patterns so ancient they'd lost all meaning. No, they should not have lost all meaning because I need to know what meaning they have. Because what are these swirls and whirls or patterns? Are they all just different versions of like a shared language? And why can't we know what language it is? Could they also be word marks that Aelin just doesn't recognize yet in this book? Remember, she does learn more word marks later on, so I don't know. But as a language freak, I am obsessed with putting these clues together and trying to figure out how this shared language, because it is shared, connects the Maasverse. So we will definitely revisit this because every time I read whirls and patterns, I spiral.
Our last description parallel is short and sweet. In Heir of Fire, we're introduced to the Blue Blood Witches. The Blue Bloods are more spiritual of the Iron Teeth clans, and were very devoted to the three-faced goddess. We learned that the Blue Blood matron wears a crown of barbed iron stars because they have such a strong connection to the three-faced goddess that they need extra iron to keep them tethered to their realm. Who wears a crown of stars in the Maasverse? I'm going to give you a second to take a guess. 3, 2, 1. Rhysand. Rhysand wears a crown of stars in the Maasverse. In Akamath, when they visit the Court of Nightmares, he is described as wearing, quote, crown of stars.
And finally, language parallels. For us, language parallels refer to wording in the Maasverse that is either similar or exactly the same across different books. These parallels focus less on descriptions and more on the actual specific words that are being used and the context in which they appear. Language parallels tend to be short and sweet, which is why we have them at the end. So let's start with Aedion. Dorian notices that Adian carries the sword of Orinth and accuses him of being sentimental. Adian replies, quote, "Symbols have power, Prince." In House of Earth and Blood, Rune and the Autumn King are talking about the horn. Rune tells his father that it has no power. Remember, it was broken. The Autumn King replies, "It is a symbol, and symbols will always wield power of their own." So, almost exactly the same language is used to describe two objects that do hold a lot of power through their symbolism. The Sword of Orinth is a reminder of everything that Terrasen was and used to be, and the horn starts as a stolen broken relic and ends up as literally a dead trove object. So, yeah.
Our next parallel comes from Rowan and Aelin. Rowan bites Aelin to trigger her shift through anger, which works. And Rowan's first words to Aelin after they shift? "There you are." Okay, I know this sounds familiar to you all, okay? Because these are also Rhysand's first words to Feyre. Quote, which is a very famous line, "There you are, I've been looking for you." However, this is also your friendly reminder that Rowan did it first. Heir of Fire was published in September 2014, and ACOTAR was published in May 2015.
The next language parallel is all about names. We're just going to combine these because we're not going to need to get deep into all of these. In Heir of Fire, we have 3 names that have a Maasverse connection. Names are interesting because SJM has stated that she doesn't reuse names, yet here we are with names as a language parallel. So that makes no sense. Our first one is one that we've touched on before. The Rune Mountains, spelled Ruhnn, come up again in this book. One of the main characters in Crescent City is Rune, spelled Ruhn. The difference is literally just that extra N. But it's not just the name that is a parallel. The Rune Mountains are described as a labyrinth of mist, trees, and shadows. Rune's power is literally wielding shadows. So, there's some things there. Our next one is Cressida. I think that's how you say it. It could be Cressida. Who knows? If you know, let us know. Cressida, or Cressida, I don't know, is the name of the Blue Blood matron. Cressida is also the name of the Princess of Adriata in the ACOTAR series. Now, this language parallel does come with a caveat because apparently SJM has admitted that this was indeed a mistake in an interview. However, I was not able to confirm this and find this interview. So if you have it, please send us the link because we don't like to say things without confirming them. So if you have it, let us know because I did look and I could not find it. Our final name parallel is the name of Iskra's wyvern, which is Fendir, spelled Fendir. That is one letter off from Fender, spelled, I can't even say them differently. It's literally the same thing. Spelled Fendyr, which is Danica's last name in Crescent City. The Fendir line is considered a noble bloodline of wolf shifters and often produce alpha wolves. In Norse mythology, Fenrir is the name of a giant wolf who is the son of Loki. He's usually connected to the end of the world, but I'm not going to spiral about that right now.
This next phrasing also caught our attention as a possible language parallel. Emrys tells a story about a clever wolf and a magical firebird. We get no other context about what the fuck the story is about, which is annoying because, we're both psycho. But we have a magical firebird in the Maasverse. Our firebird is Vasa or Vesa from ACOTAR. I don't really know how to say that. But anyways, who has been cursed by Koshde. Her curse makes her a firebird by day and a woman by night. It's giving Shrek. But anyways, in ACOTAR, Lucian sets off to find Vasa to see if she can help him with their hybrid situation by using her firebird form, which she does. Lucian, Vasa, and Jurian end up becoming friends, forming a little group called the Band of Exiles. The clever wolf part is up for debate because there are so many wolves in the Maasverse. Adian is the wolf in the north, and we have the wolf shifters in Crescent City. Feyre and Nesta are actually both described as wolves at different points in ACOTAR. Feyre makes water wolves to defend the rainbow, and Eris is sometimes described as wolf-like. So maybe Vasa will join forces with the clever wolf in the next ACOTAR book, or maybe there's a clever wolf already among the ACOTAR crew that just hasn't maybe been revealed yet.
The wind is the main focus of our next parallel language connection. In Heir of Fire, we learn that Manon feels very connected to the wind as if it speaks to her. It's why she's the best flyer in her clan. Manon's sword is literally named Wind Cleaver. When we saw this, I was like, that I have heard these things before. Another witch tells us that the witches are born on the back of the wind. Nesta in ACOTAR is deeply connected to the wind, but only in A Court of Silver Flames and in ACOWAR, because in ACOWAR, the Bone Carver says that the wind moans Nesta's name because she took something from the cauldron. And then in A Court of Silver Flames, like we all know, Nesta ends up living at literally the House of Wind. And she also basically makes it sentient, which that's a lot to unpack, which we're not going to do right now. There are some other threads connecting Koschei and the Wind as well, but we're going to save those for another time because we are really trying not to get our head of ourselves here.
It's very hard with this book. Very, very hard. In this book, we learn more about Aylin's parents. This is definitely something we'll revisit in the future during Kingdom of Ash when Aylin is tethered to Rowan through her tattoo, because I know it made Cami spiral a little. Cami. I don't know why I said your name like that, because I know it made Cami spiral a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. But anyways, we learned that Aylin's mom, Evelyn, had a difficult time with childbirth. She almost died. And Aylin says that it was her, quote, father's will that kept her tethered to this world. A tether. Interesting, because that's all over the Maasverse, especially in this context. We learned when Feyre dies as a human, she sees a tether in the darkness. She follows the tether back. Later, we learn that this tether was her and Rhysand's mating bond. So, all that kept Feyre tethered to this world was her bond with Rhysand. In Crescent City, we learn that the drop requires an anchor, or a tether, so that they can make the ascent back up. Danica anchors Bryce during her drop. So this idea of staying tethered to the world through another person is present in all 3 series.
This one did make me spiral. Okay. Let's revisit the witches. Our next parallel connection has to do with the three-faced goddess, and I'm really going to try to control myself here, but this will definitely come up again, whether it's in one of these episodes or other things, because this is very interesting. In this book, Manon starts feeling that pull and ebb and flow in the world. We'll see that again in other books. She says, quote, that invisible current that some called fate and some called the loom of the three-faced goddess. This is a larger reference to the weavers of fate that exist in mythologies of various cultures, the Norns in Norse mythology and the Moirae in Greek mythology. In ACOTAR, we have the weaver, aka Striga, who also sits at a loom. But it is more than that because, you guys know, we learned that Striga is the bone carver's sister along with Koschei. And what the bone carver says when we learn that they're all siblings ties all of this even closer together. And again, I'm really trying to control myself. Quote, the carver traced 3 overlapping interlocked circles in the dirt. You have met my sister, my twin, the weaver, as you now call her. I knew her as Striga. She and our older brother, Koschei. How they delighted in this world when we fell into it. Very important verb there, fell. How those ancient fae feared and worshipped them. Had I been braver, I might have bided my time, waited for their power to fade, for that long ago fae warrior to trick Striga into diminishing her power and becoming confined to the middle. Koschei, too, confined and bound by his little lake on the continent, all before Prythian, before the land was carved up, again, very interesting word, and any high lord was crowned. Again, I'm really trying here, guys. Not only is Striga a weaver who sits at a loom, the bone carver draws 3 overlapping interlocked circles in the dirt as he describes them. Shortly after this, the bone carver reveals that Striga and Koschei are both death gods. But it seems like the bone carver is not, which is interesting since the bone carver seems to be able to show Feyre what Nyx will look like in the future. And again, because it is me, I'm going to pull out some mythology. In Norse mythology, the 3 Norns each represent something. Erd represents the past, Verdandi represents the present, and Skuld the future. If the bone carver represents the future, which of these 2, thank you for the honk, do Striga and Koschei represent? Striga and the bone carver do die in the Battle of Akawar. So that just leaves Koschei, which is fine because we have other things about him. If these 3 siblings are meant to represent a version of the three-faced goddess, what does it mean that we've lost 2 of them? Again, we will definitely return to this topic because, as you can tell, it is very exciting for me.
And of course, we saved the best for last, baby. Our final language parallel is the word devour. We have decided to make this a standalone episode at the end of our coverage of this series because we've started tracking it throughout each book, but we will quickly recap this for you here. We start noticing that the word devour is constantly used to describe the Valg power and the power of other beings in the Maasverse. A very select few of characters in the Maasverse have what we refer to as the power to devour. The word devour is used in the Maasverse to describe the powers of several other beings: Kaltain, Rhysand, Amryn, Truth-Teller, which is Azrael's blade, the Star Sword, the Cauldron, Apollyon, and the Void. In Heir of Fire, the power to devour is again linked to the Valg. The first time it's used is to describe Maeve's second skin, which is described as, quote, shadows and claws and darkness to devour your soul. When the Valg show up to attack Mistward, their arrival is described as, quote, the darkness on the horizon had spread, devouring the stars, the trees, the light. When the Valg princes face off against Aelin, he literally says, I shall enjoy devouring you from the inside out. These are just 3 main instances we're focusing on right now, but again, this is a word that we're keeping an eye out because SJM uses it very, very intentionally to describe a certain kind of power. For us, tracking this word through the Maasverse has opened up questions about the true nature of power, darkness, and fate. What does it mean to have the power to devour? What implications does it have for characters like Rhys or Apollyon? And now, our absolute favorite section, theories and speculations. Let's get into some of our unhinged shit, of course. Let's start with general speculations before we kick off our individual theories. In Heir of Fire, we have 2 mentions of other kingdoms. Those kingdoms are unknown to us, even by the end of the series. This is the first time other kingdoms are brought up, which remain unnamed. Before this, we had mentions of Wendelin and the Southern Continent, but those are given names and we visit both of them. The first mention is, quote, there was a whole giant world to the south and east of Wendelin, kingdoms and empires she'd heard of in passing, but had never known much about. You've heard us spiral about this during episodes when they have come up, but we literally never learn what is south or east of Wendelin. We also are never given a map of Wendelin, but let's stay focused because we could spiral about this again for days. And then Aelin is talking to Rowan and she reveals that he has been to other kingdoms. Quote, you said that you had once campaigned in a kingdom that no longer exists. You've been off to war several times, it seems, and seen the world. Again, you have heard us spiral about this during the deep dive when this came up, but what do you mean kingdoms that no longer exist? Who or what took out those kingdoms? Why do they no longer exist? What happened to the people of those kingdoms? Why is no one deeply concerned that the kingdoms just don't exist anymore? Because that just doesn't happen overnight. Okay. The reason that this is in our speculation section is because this is a trend in the Maasverse. In House of Sky and Breath, Bryce enters the Dusk Room and finds the horrifying truth that the Asteri have been conquering and draining planets all over the fucking universe. We see that trend with Erewhon and the Valg and Aurelia. They want to conquer and control. Are some of the kingdoms mentioned in the Dusk Courtroom in Crescent City connected to the Fallen Kingdoms in Throne of Glass? Again, this is something we will definitely revisit, especially towards the end of this series.
We also, I'm so sorry, had an oversight. We realized that we've actually never fully laid out the theory that we have on the unfinished game in an episode. We literally just did a slide post back when we dropped our Throne of Glass Maasverse episode, and then we continued to reference it without ever saying it out loud to you guys. I think that's because it started with a bunch of screenshots, and now it's grown to be a joint theory between the two of us. So we will be adding it to all future Maasverse episodes. We just didn't realize that there was no point of reference for you guys in an episode. So this theory started with something that Cain says when he's possessed by the Valg. He tells Aelin, quote, you were brought here. All of you were. All the players in the unfinished game. My friends have told me so. The theory stems from the idea that the unfinished game did not end in Kingdom of Ash. And I know we would all hate that because we all want Aelin to live in peace, but it's actually more so playing out throughout the Maasverse. In Akamath, Amryn uses very similar wording when talking about all the shit that's going down. She says, quote, interesting that it should happen right as all the ancient players have returned. And this trend continues throughout ACOTAR. In A Court of Silver Flames, Nesta feels like she's brought by something to pick up the harp. We see it in Crescent City too, when Bryce feels like Erd brought her to Prythian. It does feel like there's some sort of force controlling the quote-unquote unfinished game. There aren't too many updates to add to it, though, with Heir of Fire. The main confirmation we get here is that Aelin is starting to directly connect the unfinished game to the Valg. Quote, but the words caught in her throat as a memory struck from months ago, a lifetime ago, of a realm that was in between, of the thing that lived inside Cain speaking to her and Elena. Elena, daughter of Brannon. You were brought back, it said, all the players in the unfinished game. a game that had begun at the dawn of time when a demon race had forged the word keys and used them to break into this world, and Maeve had used their power to banish them. But some demons had remained trapped in Aurelia and waged a second war centuries later when Elena fought against them. What of the others, who had been sent back to their realm? What if the King of Otterlin, in learning of the keys, had also learned where to find them, where to harness them? So that is really the only addition to this theory that we have. Other than connecting it to the Valg, this quote also sets up a possible timeline for us. The unfinished game started at the dawn of time. Again, we will revisit this theory, and our apologies for referencing it. Like, we always are like, the unfinished game, and then we realize that we had never added it to any Maasverse episode. So we apologize.
We're literally just girls, okay? We
We're
try
just
best.
girls.
We're just girls, and we both have like
I just think of all the
rampant
times where we've been like, oh my God, the
Yeah.
unfinished game. And then it's like, it's not been in anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're sorry. We're so sorry. But again, we're just girls. Okay. Now for individual theories and speculations. Okay, I'm gonna go first. And please, please, please do not come for me, okay? Because I know how you ACOTAR girlies are. Like, I know how you are. But just know that I love him too, okay? But now that we are in Heir of Fire, we can finally talk about this. Like, I can finally get deeper into this. Rhysand is Valg, and you simply cannot tell me otherwise. I'm sorry. You simply can't tell me otherwise. First of all, let's all talk about the description of Maeve's eyes in Heir of Fire. Maeve's eyes are described as violet and starry, as well as her having raven's black hair. In ACOTAR, when we are first introduced to Rhysand, he is described as, quote, high fae, no doubt. His short black hair gleamed like a raven's feather, offsetting his pale skin and blue eyes so deep they were violet even in the firelight. They twinkled with amusement as he beheld me. Also, okay, again, hear me out. You could say that Rune from Crescent City is also Valg, because here's his description when we were first introduced to him in Crescent City. Quote, a dark-haired fae male bursted through the interrogation room, even with the silver hoop through his lower lip, even with the one side of his long raven black hair buzzed, even with the sleeves of tattoos beneath the leather jacket. There was no disguising the heritage the strikingly handsome face broadcasted. Okay, so that's Rune. His eyes are also being described as, quote, his blue eyes blazing into near violet. Okay. And then at the end of Hosab, when Bryce is yanked to Prithian, she states, quote, Bryce gasped, Rune? The male blinked. His eyes were the same shade of violet blue as Rune's. His short hair the same gleaming black. The male's skin was browner, but the face, the posture, it was her brother's. His ears were pointed too, though he also possessed those leathery wings like the other two males. It is quite interesting to me that these two are similarly described, sharing the same physical features, type of eyes, and Raven's black hair. So again, Maeve, Valg, okay, her descriptions are similar to Rhys and Rune, okay. But here is where shit gets crazier. It's when you compare their powers, okay. When you compare Rhys and Rune's powers to the Valg. Let's start with a little refresher on what the Valg's power looks like and compare them to Rune and Rhys's. From Throne of Glass, we know that there are different types of Valg, and based on where they are in the hierarchy, they are more powerful. But basically, Valg can summon darkness, drain magic, enter people's minds, interfere with memories, make people relive memories, and they can also use darkness as weapons. So, with that in mind, let's start with Rune. In Crescent City, Rune is described as having powers such as manipulating shadows and being able to cloak himself or others in darkness, and being able to communicate with others in their minds, which we see him do with Bryce. But he cannot read thoughts, which, again, this is all very similar to how the Valg's powers are described. I do think that if Rune is Valg, he's not necessarily a powerful Valg because he doesn't have some of those more powerful traits, but there is still a little Valg inside him, okay? Now, here's where shit gets actually crazy. And again, please, ACOTAR girlies, please do not come for me because the proof is in the pudding, sister. Okay, let's start with how the king's power is described in Heir of Fire. Also, as we know, the king is Valg in this moment when Aelin and the king have this interaction. I'm going to read this whole thing because it really is a must, okay? Quote, a worm of darkness pushing its way in, her magic roiled, thrashing, trying to get it out, to burn it up, to save them both. But Aelin, get it out, she rasped, pushing at her temples as she backed away from the table. Two of the foreign lords grabbed Dorian from the table and swept him from the room. Her magic bucked like a stallion as the worm wriggled farther in. Get it out. Aelin, her father was on his feet now, hand on his sword. Half the others were standing too, but she flung out a hand to keep them away, to warn them. Blue flame shot out. 2 people dove in time to avoid it, but everyone was on their feet as they vacated seats went up in flames. The worm would latch into her mind and never let go. She grabbed at her head, her magic screaming, so loud it could shatter the world. And then she was burning, a living column of turquoise flames, sobbing as the dark worm continued to work and the walls of her mind began to give. Above her own voice, above the shouting in the hall, she heard her father's bellow, a command to her mother, who was on her knees, the hands outreached towards in supplication. Do it, Evelyn. The pillar of flame grew hotter, hot enough that people were fleeing now. Her mother's eyes met her own, full of pleading and pain. Then water, a wall of water crashing down on her, slamming her to the stones, flowing down her throat, into her eyes, choking her, drowning her, until there was no air for her flame, only water in its freezing embrace. The king of Otteran looked at her for a third time and smiled. Okay, so recap. Worm, in her mind, okay, we can tell that the king of Otterland is the one that did it. All right, anyways, so that is the description of the king's power, which, again, we know that the king is Valg. Now, let's move into Rhysand's power and how Feyre describes it when he tries to enter her mind. Feyre describes it as, quote, deeper than that, power that seized everything inside me and took control. Even my blood flowed where he willed it. I couldn't move. An invisible, talon-tipped hand scraped against my mind, and I knew. One push, one swipe of those mental claws, and who I was would cease to exist. Had I retained any semblance of control over my body, I might have vomited. So, even though they are not described with the same type of object, in Aelin's, it's described as a worm, and with Rhysand's, it's described as a talon-tipped claw, we can say that it's basically the same thing because it's taking over their mind in a sense. And the fact that they both are feeling pain and fear in that moment, like something is trying to pierce their mind. And now, do I think that Rhysand being Valg means that he will be bad? No, but it does make me wonder if Rhysand and Maeve ever had some interaction with each other, because the reality is we still don't know who Rhysand's mother is. We don't know what his last name is, and we don't really know much about his upbringing, is the reality. Like, we don't know. We don't know anything. So where the fuck does he come from? Because also, if you remember in ACOTAR, they have said multiple occasions, there has never been a High Lord that has had as much power as Rhysand. So again, it begs the question, where the fuck does he come from? And also, I don't know, but this has been mentioned so many times that, like, the older you get in Fae years, like, you can be bound to have to make, like, you're bound to make some tough decisions, which can make you seem evil in a sense. And the reality is, in A Court of Silver Flames, we get painted a very different light of Rhysand than we did in the first 3 ACOTAR books, because it wasn't from Feyre's POV. So I'm not going to get into too much about that here because we're basically just sticking with Rhysand and Rune are Valg, but it will be very interesting to see what happens in ACOTAR 6. So that is my first theory. Again, please, ACOTAR girlies, don't come for me, okay? My next theory is not fully thought out, so please bear with me, but I think iron is very fucking interesting, and here's why. So as we talked about before, in ACOTAR, iron doesn't have any effect on the Fae, but in Throne of Glass, we know that iron stifles magic, as we saw with the potion that Sorsha, R.I.P. girl, made for Dorian, and obviously what happens with Aelin in Kingdom of Ash. So here are my thoughts. We know that in Aurelia, iron stifles magic, and in Throne of Glass, we see the most characters who have secondary forms. For example, Aelin can shift from human to Fae, Rowan can shift into a hawk, Gabrielle lion, and so on and so forth. Well, in ACOTAR, we don't really get that. The only people who have a secondary form are the High Fae. But in ACOTAR, iron doesn't have any effect on the Fae, like in Throne of Glass. So I wonder why that is. In my opinion, the Fae in Aurelia would be more powerful in a sense than the Fae in ACOTAR because most of them, if not all of them, have a secondary form. So maybe the iron has more effect on them because they are more powerful than the Fae from ACOTAR. But this is why my theory is still a work in progress, because we know that Avalon is the homeworld of the Fae, which is what I think is in Prythian. Like, you know, I don't want to talk for Cami, but I'm pretty sure she also feels the same way. But I don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I do feel like iron is the parallel in these situations, and that it is going to, I don't know. Iron in general is just very interesting to me. It's very interesting, and I think it's weird that in ACOTAR, iron is like talked about, and it's been like this huge lore that like if you wear iron, you will stay, like the Fae will stay away. But then that's really not the case. Like they laugh, they think it's funny. So I don't know, but I guess we will find out.
Yep. I also hard agree that the Fae in Throne of Glass are more powerful than the Fae in ACOTAR. Hard agree. Okay, I have a few theories, and I'm going to get through these quickly. I have one that I've been building since Throne of Glass, and I actually don't think I have updates for it, but I don't remember if I put them in here. I also have a huge theory that I'm working on, but I'm still getting my thoughts together, so I cannot speak on that yet. I've been telling Brooke this theory since before we even started reading Heir of Fire. One of my new theories is based on what we learn in Heir of Fire, and I think that Koschei is somehow connected to the lake creature if he isn't literally that lake creature. I did post this theory on my personal TikTok, and people had a lot of opinions, but let me explain. Emrys gives us a huge lore drop about this lake creature. Remember, they encounter it, it's a big deal, blah, blah, blah. We learn that it's almost as old as the mountain itself, and it claims to have been born in another world, but it slipped into their world when the gods were looking elsewhere. Okay. The lake creature preyed upon Fae and humans until a mighty Fae warrior challenged it. We learn that that warrior is Athril when he wielded both Goldrin and Silba's ring. Athril carves out the lake creature's eye and curses it to remain trapped at the lake for as long as the mountain stands. Emrys also reveals that the lake creature spoke an archaic form of the old language, despite the fact that it is from another world. Okay, let's go over what we know about Koschei. He has two siblings, Striga and the Bone Carver, R.I.P. They all came from another world as well. We mentioned this earlier. The Bone Carver says that his siblings delighted in this world when we fell into it. The verb fell is a very interesting choice because it implies that they didn't really choose to go to Prythian, but rather ended up there. Or maybe were pulled there for unknown reasons, like we've seen other people get pulled different places. We learned that a Fae warrior tricked Koschei and confined him to his little lake on the continent. Hello. There should be alarm bells, okay? Let's pause there to go over the similarities. 1, the lake creature and Koschei both come from another world. 2, the lake creature is cursed to stay in its lake, just like Koschei is confined to his lake in ACOTAR. But let's continue. Koschei is a death god, meaning that he feeds on life itself. That should sound familiar to you. It is essentially what the Valg and the Asteri do. When the Weaver dies in ACOWAR, she bleeds black blood. Since they are all siblings, we can assume that Koschei will also bleed black blood. We've said this before. In Throne of Glass, beings who bleed black blood are Valg, either through possession or creation. If my theory is correct, then the lake creature is Valg and it bleeds black blood. To me, this is solidified by the fact that Athril is only able to take down this lake creature when he is wearing Silba's ring, which grants him immunity from the Valg. Okay? I'm going to calm down. But I am going to take this one step further by adding in some folklore because it is me and I cannot help myself. In folklore, Koschei is referred to as Koschei the Deathless, and his stories often feature a spell that prevents him from being killed. He hides his death inside objects to protect it. For example, and this is a long example, his death may be hidden in a needle that is hidden inside an egg. The egg is in a duck, the duck is in a hare, the hare is in a chest, and the chest is buried or chained up on a faraway island called Buyan. This is a folktale. Okay. The entire concept is similar to the concept of soul jars or Horcruxes from Harry Potter. So I do think it's possible that by carving out his eye, Athril accidentally made the lake creature deathless. He gave it a soul jar. Now, I know that this theory brings up a lot of timeline questions. I do not have the answers to that. You guys know that. But you guys also know that we do not believe time to be linear in the Maasverse because time is corrupted when portals are open and these characters are opening portals left and right, okay? If Koschei is a lake creature, then it could mean that the events of Throne of Glass are in the past and at some point that mountain did fall and Koschei traveled to Prythian. He could have traveled there while the gods are busy getting Aelin to forge the lock and sending them back to their homeworld, since that's exactly what the Bone Carver says happened when they, again, fell into Prythian. Or it could mean that in the future ACOTAR books, we will see Koschei leave Prythian and enter Aurelia, putting the events of ACOTAR in the past. Again, I believe time to be an absolute mess in the Maasverse, and all of my theories work under that assumption. My second theory is more of a speculation and connection because I haven't 100% figured out what I think it means yet, if it means anything at all. In Heir of Fire, we learn that Manon names Abraxos after the great beast, the serpent who wrapped the world in its coils, and who will devour it at the very end when the three-faced goddess bids him to. We know that the three-faced goddess is tied to the idea of fate for the witches and sits at the loom. I briefly touched on this during our deep dives, but let me give you the context because it's been a while since that episode. The description Manon gives is basically word for word how Jormungandr is described in Norse mythology. This serpent coils around the earth beneath the oceans and is destined to fight Thor during the end of the world. It is often called the Midgard serpent or the world serpent since what it encircles is technically Earth. I hope you're already seeing some familiar words, okay? But obviously, this is interesting because we know that Midgard is the name of the planet in Crescent City. But I do have more that I couldn't get into during the deep dive episode where we talked about this. Jormungandr is often depicted as a snake eating its own tail, aka an Ouroboros. So, again, so many assumptions here, but I'm assuming that SJM took inspo for Abraxos' name from Jormungandr and added her own lore/spin to it, which ties him to the three-faced goddess, since remember, Abraxos is named after the serpent who wrapped the world in his coils and who will devour it at the very end of the world when the three-faced goddess bids him to. So, the three-faced goddess controls Abraxos in the lore, but not our Abraxos. You know. Why does this matter to me? Because of the Bone Carver and his connection to the Ouroboros. ACOTAR is the only series where the Ouroboros is featured, and we learn that it's referred to as the mirror of beginnings and endings. It apparently shows the looker who or what they really are. In ACOTAR, the border of the Ouroboros has a serpent devouring its own tail. As far as we know, the original owner of the Ouroboros was the Weaver. When the Bone Carver talks about his three siblings, again, we mentioned this earlier, he draws three interlocking, overlapping circles in the dirt. The one and only thing that the Bone Carver wants in exchange for his help during the war is for Farah to bring him the fucking Ouroboros. So, let me break this down as it functions in my head because I know I'm saying a lot of different things, but Abraxos is named after the serpent, we know. SJM took inspo for that lore from Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent in Norse mythology. She added her own lore by saying that the three-faced goddess is the one who controls that serpent in our Throne of Glass world. Jormungandr is depicted often in Norse mythology as an Ouroboros, which is the mirror from ACOTAR, whose original owner is the Weaver, who the Bone Carver connects to three overlapping interlocking circles. Okay. The Weaver and the three-faced goddess have some connection because Manon mentions a loom when talking about the three-faced goddess. Manon later connects all of this for us by bringing up the Eye of Elena, which has similar interlocking, overlapping circles on it that connect to the three-faced goddess. What does this all mean? I have no clue. That's why I said it's not done yet. I don't think Abraxos is actually connected to the physical Ouroboros, but I do think that this is common lore in between Aurelia and Prythian, though to what extent, I literally cannot say yet. I don't know. I'm building it. My last theory has to do with the Karanan bond. I will say this is my least developed theory because I could not go searching through House of Sky and Breath for all of the evidence to this, but I do believe that the princes of hell specifically use the Karanan bond as inspiration for Hunt and Bryce. In Heir of Fire, we learn about the Karanan bond. It's a rare bond that allows one person to yield their power to another through a blood connection, though they must be compatible. It's supposed to be pretty rare. And when using the Karanan bond, the user retains their own magic. For example, when Rowan lets Aelin use the Karanan bond in this book, she uses her fire magic, not Rowan's wind or ice. In House of Flame and Shadow, we learned that Hunt was basically like bioengineered lab experiment to be a power battery for Bryce. She can use him to charge up when she's drained. Bryce figures out that she can combine her powers with others outside of Hunt, like Azrael and Hypaxia. But I do think that the Princes of Hell used the Karanan bond as an inspiration when they created Hunt. And that's really as far as I've gotten with this theory. I have no idea when or where they would have seen the Karanan bond in action. I just can't help but look at the similarities and think that there's something there. I need to reread or listen to Crescent City again to solidify some of my evidence or to get rid of this theory entirely. And I know I haven't updated my theory on the Starborn line since our Crown of Midnight episode. I grabbed a few more pieces of evidence in Heir of Fire, but not enough to update it. So just know I'm working on it. Let me cook. Okay? I'm cooking. And that's our deep dive into the Maasverse connections in Heir of Fire. We love tracking the Maasverse connections and speculating about what everything means.
Join us next week. Well, join Cami next week for #Throne Thursday as Cami covers the gods and goddesses in Throne of Glass in a special episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod, baby.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you like what you heard. It really helps us out.
Keep reading, assassins.
Bye!